Welcome to number 3 in our series on 3 cosmic messages. This one is entitled The Everlasting Gospel, and what a great subject to be thinking about. Of course, that's referring to Revelation 14. Let's take a look at Revelation 14 verse 6. I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven. He had the eternal good news, otherwise known as the everlasting gospel. Gospel means good news. We go back to the ancient Anglo-Saxon for that God spell, which really means God's story. It's God's history, God's good news. And here we have this angel. He had the eternal good news to announce to those who lived on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And what was his message? He cried out in a loud voice, "Give God reverence and glory, for the time of his judgment has come. Worship the one who made heaven and earth and sea and springs of water." It's a call to worship because of the good news. And worship, of course, is to give somebody their worth, what you think about them in a very positive way. You're giving them what you think they deserve in terms of value, how much you value that person. That's what worship is all about. It's not simply going through an order of service at church. That's not really worship. Worship is you saying, "God, you are so wonderful, incredible, you deserve praise and glory, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you, especially for showing who you are and for, yes, of course, saving little old me." But this is part of the great controversy, as we saw in the first study, looking at how God is vindicated, how he wins the battle, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord Almighty. That's how it works. And in looking at the everlasting gospel, we of course have to start thinking about what the good news really is. Because all too often we've made the gospel into all kinds of different things, but that doesn't mean to say that's the true gospel. And Paul says, if anybody preaches a different gospel, let them be anathema, excluded, even the word curse, because that is not what we have been preaching. We're preaching the good news of God. Sometimes we make the good news rather bad news. So let's make sure that our message is always positive, because we're talking about the God that we love, the God that we think is the one who is true and good and right and all those other wonderful qualities. We sometimes want to split it up into omniscient and omnipresent and all these other things. But I want to talk in good old Anglo-Saxon words of simple things, especially that God is primarily a being who operates on the principle of love, thinking of the other, not about himself. Yes, there are consequences to what happens, and the gospel spells that out. You do need to know where you're going and where you're going to end up. If you choose to go the wrong path, you're going to end up in disaster, into non-existence. There is going to be a day of reckoning. There is going to be judgment. But the whole point is that you can choose to follow God, who says, "Come to me that you might have life." This is the everlasting gospel. And we are given material in 1 Corinthians and in Romans and in 1 Peter and Matthew. I urge you to look at all of that. But the most important thing is that as we consider the good news, let's think about what that really is all about. For when those early disciples went out, they were then suddenly apostles, simply because that comes from the Greek word apostello, which means to be sent. They were sent out. They went into all the world. That was the Great Commission in Matthew. And they went in to share the good news. And they went out and talked about Jesus being crucified, to be sure, but more significantly, because there are many victims in the Roman world of that time who've been crucified, they were preaching Jesus raised from the dead, that the resurrection of Jesus demonstrating his power over his death, power to change, power to save each and every one of us. That was their glorious message. We worship a God who came to this world, died at our hands, and yet is risen indeed, and now is the one who's going to return to take you home. That's the gospel. Let's make sure we preach just that.